Burien is a small city just 12 minutes away from Seattle. It officially became a city in 1993, making it 26 years old. Although it seems young, it's gone through a lot of changes in the last 26 years. In order to find out what type of change it's gone through, we interviewed 4 people and asked them 9 questions. What economic policies and processes have shaped Burien in recent history?
Certainly relocating City Hall with the library, co-locating that and creating this downtown core really intentionally, improving 152nd gave a sense of place for Burien. So when cities think about having sort of identification, people know when they say the city of Burien, they kind of know that there's a downtown core and there's a and when they created this downtown core, they really tried to make it walkable and accessible to the different services that are usually needed by residents living here. And so when they think they're part of a city, they know exactly where that means.
In the 2008s to the 2010s, Burien was going through a lot of changes. In 2009, the library at the time got replaced by the new one we now have, and it became a community center instead. Also in 2009, the new transit station was opened. Besides the library and the transit center, they also improved the town square and the road near it, 152nd. All of these improvements began to attract richer people, and Burien started to become more gentrified. According to Nowcasting Gentrification, using Yelp data to quantify neighborhood change, there are many signs the city is gentrifying. One sign is when a new Starbucks opens. This raises the price of houses around it up by 0.5%. Another sign is when businesses open and close very fast. This can be seen both in the center and the outskirts of Burien. A third sign is the app Yelp. This is because reviewers are always updating about the city in real time, and it can be used to see how gentrified the city has become. The gentrification has both good and bad sides. The good is that it helps how the city looks and improves services like the library. The bad is that it causes rent to increase by a lot, making it overall bad because families can no longer afford their rents and get kicked out. Another economic policy that has shaped Burien is when it became a sanctuary city. On January 9, 2017, the city passed the Sanctuary City Ordinance with 4 yes votes and 3 no votes. What is a sanctuary city? It pretty much means that it stops undocumented people from being deported or asked for papers by officials like the police. This is a good thing because it shows that most of Burien care about the people that live here, even if they are undocumented. What economic policies and processes are reshaping Burien currently?
So I would say the fact that Seattle is growing and people want to, it's becoming non-affordable, so they're coming here. And I think a lot of it is, we're having to redefine building codes, zoning. We're planning for the future. So we have a study being done right now on what the future looks for Burien. So we have like a zoning conversation. Height restrictions and being a little bit more relaxed on building bigger buildings, and we have a hotel that the council has authorized to start negotiating with hotel concepts. So a lot of that stuff has been a process that's been taken by the council and said, okay, is this something we really want to go, and is this something we want to explore? And so I would say that's one of them. And then the other thing is that, the philosophy, and I don't know if it's the whole council, but I would say it's a good percentage of it, is making sure that we continue to be a place where small business can start and flourish.
Currently, we decided we wanted a hotel. That's going to be really huge for us, so then we can start collecting on something called lodging tax, so that every time that someone stays a night, we get a portion of that bill from the hotel to Burien, which is a more equitable way to collect funding, so we're not taxing everyone that lives here even more.
Another process or policy is more of a strategy, but one of the recent economic development managers, the person that the city hires to do that, to recruit businesses and to create jobs, started a hotel project. So there's a hotel project being negotiated between a developer and the city, which owns a piece of land that's right behind the Chase Bank and the parking garage, kind of kitty corner to Big Lots, right next to Big Lots. And it's going to be the first hotel for the city of Burien that will help with attracting folks that are wanting to be tourists of Seattle, being able to stay in a small town that doesn't have to be as expensive as downtown Seattle. And it's going to bring also more tax income. So cities, the way that they make money to provide us services is through tax base. Usually they tax homeowners or businesses. Hotels is another big way to get taxes, and that brings in revenues, which then provides services for us, like parks improvements, road improvements, things like that. So that hotel potentially could be a big boost to the economy here. If that one does well, more will want to come in here, and that will mean more revenue for the city, which should result in better services for us.
The location where they want to build the hotel at is by Big Lots and Chase. Right now it's just being used as a car dealership lot. The hotel will have 140 guest rooms, and 100 of the units might be used as one big complex for Burien residents, like apartments. What they're really called though is multifamily housing, and they look like this. Building a hotel will let them tax the visitors with a lodging fee. When this fee is paid by visitors, it goes back into the city's fund. This means that hopefully, because they have extra funds from the hotel, that they won't need to tax residents as much as they usually do. Also, you might have noticed these signs around the city. They were created to guide future tourists around. The total cost to create them was around $98,000, but Burien only paid $48,000. This shows that even small things like adding signs can cost a lot of money, and it comes from our taxes. The hotel would help pay for this by giving some extra money. How will the rebuilding of Highline High School and redrawing of service area boundaries change who goes to school in Burien and their experiences?
Well, I got to tell you, the new school is great. How it's going to be zoned, I know that there's a lot of questions about it, whether it was set up purposely to some say to help, some say is that it's gonna there's more disparities that are gonna occur because of the lines. Sorry about that. Because of the lines of the redistricting of the high school. I don't know how it's going to impact us. I do believe that we're starting to see steps of gentrifying, and I think the common people that go work hard every day and have 2-3 jobs sometimes don't have the ability or haven't been reached out enough to be able to put input on what does that look like, right? So a selected few get to have the benefit of redistricting and redrawing a community. Now, I hope that it's not with malice intent and that it's for the betterment of a community. But as you can see right now, with the census, the question whether you're a citizen or not, some people thought it was just for a reason that it would be a good question to ask, but there's been already conversations where there's been written documents where it says that it's going to affect the districting and then the people's participation, and they were targeting a sector of the community by ethnicity, which I think is wrong.
For sure, having a new school, I mean, you guys have been there, you see how challenging it is, how kind of not the most welcoming assignment for learning is, because it's old, right? So for anybody, if you're in an environment that's not the newest or is not the healthiest, it's harder to learn. It just naturally is. So one, the improvements to the school will help students have better chance of success in school. They'll be more likely to succeed, to do well in school, get better grades. That will result in being able to have more opportunities for higher paying jobs. So the school is a huge impact. It's taken really long for the school to get that improvement. And something that's really important is to understand why did it take so long for Highline High School to get the improvements and for Evergreen High School to get the improvements, but other schools like Mount Rainier, they got the improvements earlier, like 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago, but they got them first. So that's why it's important to have on the school board, those are the folks that direct the superintendent and direct the school, the district, how to deploy or spend the money to improve schools. We generally haven't had folks that are like us, and when I say us, I'm a brown immigrant, I'm bilingual, bicultural, and there haven't been many people of color or students of color that are in the positions to impact where this school district decides to improve schools first. So right now you're starting to see a next generation of people my age that were students a few years ago, like you guys were, trying to get on the school board to improve that and make sure that schools that traditionally get benefits last get it first or get it faster. That relates to the boundary. I think it's more for someone that is really involved with like education, like an educator. I'm not myself personally, but however the boundaries are drawn is going to impact who's going to go to the school. And for those of you that are still able to go to both the old school and the new school, if you're moved out of that boundary or the boundaries move, you may not benefit from the new school. You may have to go to another school if the boundaries are changed. And similarly, kids that have been friends through middle school, when you have a learning environment, having that same continuity of being comfortable with your friends who you grew up with, the same kids you went to middle school with, elementary school, that makes it easier for you to learn. So when things change, it makes it harder for students to stay focused in school. So anytime there's a boundary change, it could impact who goes to that school. So that's how it could potentially impact it.
In 2018, the Highline Public Schools District changed the school boundaries. Because of these boundary changes, many of the schools where students used to go changed, and they've been moved to other ones. Everything marked with little stars where a boundary has changed. The problem with the boundary changes is that it may be targeting certain ethnicities or communities and trying to move them around to other schools. These different students who are coming in might change the demographics that Highline has and cause the school to not be as diverse. Many people who are affected by these changes feel as if they were not notified or involved in these changes and that they are not necessary. Also, Highline will soon start its reconstruction. This could possibly attract different types of people to Highline since the school is being completely rebuilt and people might start wanting to come here. It could also increase more white students since the school is being renovated just like Mount Rainier, and it will look similar to it. When Mount Rainier was renovated, the school attracted a lot more white people. Mount Rainier currently has 35% white students and it's increasing, while Highline only has 25%. Highline is made up of 76% minorities. Hopefully Highline won't become like Mount Rainier because the diversity is what makes it different and special. What cultural communities existed in Burien and what were their experiences and lives like?
So first we're on Duwamish land, period. So this was the Duwamish people lived here long before we did, like anyone else came and settled. People moved to Burien to do farming. It was a lot of farms. There were strawberry farms and pumpkin farms, like the two biggest things in the area, which is why we have our strawberry festival every year. So that's what their life was like. And then it turned into people that worked for Boeing. Like a lot of people would drive into Renton to build planes. And now we're kind of a mix of kind of tech.
We were a little bit more homogeneous economically when I went to school in K-12 here. There wasn't as much, we were all kind of that low to moderate income level. There wasn't really rich families that went to my schools, nor were there people barely making it either. It was more middle, low to moderate income folks, and we were all kind of more homogeneous that way. There wasn't as the breadth of differences. There was definitely not the difference. When I went to high school at Evergreen, it was diverse, but maybe not as many newly arrived folks. So we had a lot of Polynesian and Vietnamese and African American in my school, and I think that was fairly true when my daughter went to school at Highline also. Mm-hmm. But I think in the last 15 years, we've seen an influx of immigrant and refugees for newly arrived folks that are, from Iran and Iraq and Somalia, East African communities. So that's why I see some of the demographic shifts, and then I also see that income levels have definitely spread further and further apart. What was a lot of times middle class is now really struggling. Wages haven't kept up with the costs, and I see a lot of students taking on jobs to help their families, and that wasn't necessarily the case.
I can't really tell you what their experiences in lives were like. I can probably imagine it, because this was a community that was a farm working community. It was predominantly Italians and Irish. Mm-hmm. And they were going through the same thing that immigrants now are going through at this time, especially Latinos. So we've seen the president disparage a sector of our community. Back then, the Italians and the Irish went through the same thing, but they were probably able to assimilate. And I guess, for no fault of, or at least for no fault of my own, I was created with brown skin, black hair, and the ability to speak another language, and I wouldn't change that for anything. But I know that generations after generations is supposed to get better, but it hasn't for the African American community or the Latino community. And so when you look at the European immigrant, I think they forget that the same reasons that we have these immigrant groups coming to the United States now was the same reasons their ancestors came to this country. So I would say it was probably very difficult, and they got to work under the heat, and really knew how it was to work in the fields. And now, because of their ancestors, the individuals that are here today, they're able to benefit because of that courageous family that decided to come to the new world, right? So it saddens me to say that back in the days we were called settlers, and today we're called aliens, to create, I would say to create, I don't know if hate, but I can tell you for sure it's to create some kind of fear of immigrants.
A large part of Western Washington, including Burien and Seattle, belonged to the Duwamish people. That was until white settlers came and took the land away from them and used it for themselves. Many years after that, Burien became mostly farmland and had a large population of white people. This can be seen when you look at the 2000 Burien population census. The city was 75.73% white. There was only 24.27% minorities. Throughout the mid to late 90s, Burien was a commuter town, meaning people would only come here to eat and sleep, then go into a different city to work. Usually this was for Boeing. What are 3 cultural communities that exist in Burien today, and what are their experiences and lives like?
3, so we have the Latino community, and the Latino community is very complex because we have the Mexican community, the Guatemalan community, the Salvadorian community, and within the Asian community as well, right? Because Asia is big, most people make assumptions that our Asian community is only Vietnamese, Chinese, Japanese, but it's more than that, right? It's a lot more broad. The other was the Somali community, and to me, I don't know if I would also categorize, not necessarily as a immigrant community, or refugee community, but in the African American community. You know, with the African American community, if you look at the procurement numbers, the ability to build their businesses, the numbers are very, very, very low. Mm-hmm. For the Latino community, likewise. For the Asian community as well. So that's why the federal law has come out and said we need to make sure we have fair procurement processes and mandated by the federal government. Now, Washington got away with I-200, and so there was no more affirmative action in Washington State, and now the conversation and the bill has passed in Olympia to have I-1000, which what that means is that the disparities within communities of color, we're hoping that we're going to be able to close the gap, because we tried the process of letting people have the choice of bringing on minorities, but now it's going to have to be mandated by law. But the reality is that if you look at the communities of color, and even in the city that I live in, and you know, in the political process and the city administrative staff, you know, we still have a lot of work to do with making sure that they reflect the community. I've had several conversations here as being the first Latino elected in a metropolitan city, where the African American community, the Somali community, the Muslim community, the Asian community have shared their stories that are similar to mine. And also, you know, and I always talk about this with white women in our country, that they have a heavy lift for people of color. And I hope they understand the severity and the responsibility and the moral obligation that they have on their back, because they understand how it is to be questioned, doubted, based on their gender. The numbers show it that white women are paid less than white males, but if we want to break it down, how much less women of color are paid it's drastic. But I can tell you that they know that if they were overlooked, it's always a question, was it because of my gender, right? And so to me, I know that they will be the ones that are gonna help pave the road in making sure that we bring parity and equality in our local communities, nationally and worldwide.
But it has just expanded, it has grown. There's just a lot more of those same ones, but in large numbers. So right now, I think most of the classes, you'll see that instead of 20 students, there's probably like 200 Latinx students. There's also smaller nations that are somewhat related. So for example, there's a country-less community of people. So there's a community of people called the Cham. They are what used to be Vietnam and Cambodia, but centuries ago they lost power and Vietnam took over. Now Vietnamese people are called the country of Vietnam. So the people of Cham got booted out, and then they went to Cambodia. Then they lost power, and Cambodia said, you get out of here. So they look very much like Vietnamese people. You probably even have some friends that may be Cham, but their culture is very reserved, so they don't want to talk about their background or culture. But there's a lot of smaller subsets. There's also over in the Alcove Apartments, there's a community of I can't think of the name, Nepalese community. There's also Somali communities. So I think you're seeing like a whole mix of cultures and nationalities that are being represented in there, probably more than most. And that's because traditionally this area has been easier to get housing at lower cost. So it's not as expensive to get a house or an apartment. So then you have more immigrants, more people that are learning how to live the American dream, get together here.
In this pie chart, we can see that the largest minorities in Burien are Hispanic, Asian, and African Americans. The first is the Hispanic community with 24.3%. Some cultural communities within it include Mexican, Salvadorian, Guatemalan, Honduran, and more. The second is Asians with 12.2%. Their cultural communities include Vietnamese, Filipino, Chinese, Taiwanese, Korean, and more. There is also a large population of Pacific Islanders. Tagalog is the fourth most non-English language spoken in Washington. The third largest cultural communities are Black and African Americans at 6.89%. In their communities, there are Somalians, Kenyans, Nigerians, and many others. In what ways are Burien's communities segregated and integrated? What does this say about class and race in the city?
So I think most of the separation is on class and income. A lot of it is. So if you look at Burien, the part of Burien that's closer to the water tends to be less diverse. It's more white. And the part of the community that's closer to the freeway and to the airport tends to be communities of color. Houses that are closer to the airport and closer to traffic generally have lower values, so that means that more people can afford to buy them. And communities that have higher incomes, higher education, tend to make more money, so they tend to have houses that are higher cost, higher value, and they're closer to the water. So when you drive around, if you go to the northeast to Boulevard Park, you'll notice that they just lost a grocery store. There was a Red Apple grocery store. There's not really a lot of businesses there. There's no restaurants. There's, I think, one teriyaki shop, one bar, and a new coffee shop that just opened, and maybe 10 businesses. There's just not a lot of attention there. So you see that out here, if you go to Old Burien or you go to the downtown core, there's a lot more activity. House values are more expensive, and they're also, some would say, different quality. There's higher quality of housing. And so I think geographically that's one distinction, but it all goes to income, education, and having access to higher paying jobs.
Here we can see the houses that are the most expensive are all near the water, and the cheapest are near the airport or around the heights. We can also see that the majority of people whose incomes are increasing are by the water or the city center. Since class divides us, so does race. Race plays a part in being hired and what you will be paid and treated like. Because of race and gender you are affects pay, that also affects what you can afford, which affects where you live. This can be proven by this survey. According to the survey to the Pew Research Center, 73% of Black people and 50% of Asian and Hispanic people feel like they are less likely to have access in quality education to prepare them for STEM fields. 72% of Black people face discrimination in recruitment, hiring, and promotions, and 27% of Hispanic and Asian people feel the same. They also feel as if they are not encouraged to pursue these subjects from an early age, so they are pretty much set up to fail. They don't have any education that is actually of any quality. They don't have any role models to look up in the field, and they don't have any people who can help them in these fields because these people are pretty much against them. They are really racist to them when they're hiring them, and sometimes they turn away applications just because of their races. These surveys could shed light on why minorities tend to live closer to places that are cheaper, and why people who are usually white and richer live near the water. It's pretty much because they are not given the chance to succeed in fields that could actually make them a lot of money, and they're discriminated against so that they're not even accepted into them. What kind of city will Burien become given the current plans to develop the urban center?
Good question. Question I sleep with every night. I do believe we have to, I know that right now we're talking about renters' rights, but when it comes to residential dwellings, I do believe that here, I love the ability to go down the street on 153rd and 152nd and see in mom and pop shops. And that's what I want Burien to be, right? But I also know that the county, the state, and the city, we have an obligation to figure out how do we keep businesses that are mom and pop shops thriving. And with the rents that are skyrocketing, it affects the nature of our city. So that warm, small city that we've known could change overnight. Now, I don't want us to be a Fremont. I don't want us to be a Ballard or a West Seattle, right? I want us to have a place where we can all, regardless of our nationality, our wealth, that we're able to have a community for all of us. And that's going to have to be through shaping policy. Like for instance, I've had this conversation with developers in Burien. If you want to come and build, you should have 15% local hiring, 15% apprenticeship, and the opportunity for women and minority-owned businesses to not work on your job, but be part of building the job through the business process of procurement.
So kind of like I was saying, there a lot of the focus on making improvements is in the downtown center, and outer areas are not improved as much. So areas like the Ambom corridor doesn't have as much nicer buildings as this downtown area or hotels. So what that does is that there's less thriving economies and businesses in that area, more here. So people tend to come here more and shop more. People don't go out to Las Alturas or the few businesses next to it as much as they come here. So the urban center, they're looking at expanding it. And what that does is it's the city basically saying, all right, we're gonna start making improvements to the urban center a little bit wider away from the downtown core, so that more people can have thriving businesses, better housing, and more opportunity. So the way that it expands, it's going to impact those families that live closer to that area. The closer you are to the core, the more sidewalks you'll see, the better lighting you'll see, and that all relates to quality of life and being able to have a nice neighborhood and community.
Right now, this is the only part of the city that is urban. What that means is pretty much an area that has a lot of people, restaurants, services, and goods available to it. It looks very similar to this picture. The city really wants to expand this area and grow Burien even more, so it can support places that are outside of just the city center and support all of Burien. By expanding the urban center, this will hopefully look at the conditions, challenges, and opportunities that are in those areas and address or fix them. The problem with this, though, is that it makes Burien desirable, and if it becomes desirable, people want to move out here because it's somewhere that's cute, quaint, and has a lot of culture. But the problem with this is when an area begins to attract a lot of people, the rents begin to rise, and everyone who lives there before can no longer afford it, and they get kicked out. That is a potential risk of this plan, and it could possibly be the future of Burien if it's not addressed, and nothing is put in place to prevent this from happening, like affordable housing. What economic policies can be introduced to create more justice, sustainability, and equity in the city?
Well, like I just said, one is, figuring out where small businesses that are renting a space for their business, where they've just taken all their money they've earned their whole life, maybe even taking the money out of retirement and investing it in their dream, right, of having a business. But if all of a sudden you go in and you're paying rent, a certain amount of rent for the first 3 years, and all of a sudden on the 5th year, it's went up 300%. Your wealth has just crashed. The other part of that is making sure that we have investments where we're gonna draw companies that are interested in building community, not taking over communities. Also figuring out if we can have technical assistance dollars to where, most immigrants who come to this country, they're the first generation. And so what ends up happening, it takes several generations to be able to establish people that are teachers, doctors, business owners, CPAs. And so when I was growing up as a farm worker Latino. I knew another farm worker, I knew the mechanic, but that's about all I knew, you know. And the owner's son was my friend during the summer, but not when we went to school. So the reality is that I really didn't have mentors when I was growing up. So I do believe in strong mentorship programs for business and just community in general.
We're pricing people out of living here, and we don't want that. So it is about looking into our policies. Are we attracting developers that will develop affordable housing? Are we maintaining that affordable housing and making sure that it doesn't get sold to and become a market rate complex? So that's part of the rental housing policies that I'm talking about that we're bringing on Monday. One of those is, how do you notice a sale? Like Fox Cove, those 36 units of apartments that, suddenly sold, we didn't know anything about it. If we would have had a notice of sale policy in our policies, we would have known about it, and we would have been able to talk to King County Housing Authority as an example, someone that has a portfolio of affordable housing.
Does this property interest you? Do you want to try to purchase it and try to keep it affordable? Now it'll become market rate. So when you talk about equity, we have to think about all people living here, and it goes back to my comment about valuing people as assets and recognizing that we're a stronger economy here when we have all levels of income, all types of folks living in our community. That diversity should be celebrated and recognize that that's good economy, actually, when we can celebrate that diversity and bring fairness into our practices so that people suddenly aren't priced out of being able to have their business here or priced out of being able to live here.
Some policies that Burien can introduce to make Burien more fair is to create more affordable housing. By providing more housing that is affordable, people will not be priced out of their homes and forced to move away because of higher rents. This would also help stop gentrification. Another policy is to have tenant rights. This way, landlords here can't do what they did at the Fox Cove apartments. Earlier in September, the apartments were bought so that they could be renovated and opened again with the rent increased. All of the tenants were evicted and left to find new housing for themselves and were not compensated any money to do so by the landlords. Also, many of the tenants were living from check to check and could not go find somewhere else to live with short notice and no money to do so, so many had to become temporarily homeless. Policies and rights need to be created to avoid causing things like this to happen again, and to also protect future tenants from ever going through the struggle of thinking that they're about to be homeless. What is something that can bring different communities together in the near future?
For me, I guess what I would really like to see is a youth center, like something that really authentically engaged young people in not only, they really authentically engaged young people in their community and provided employment opportunities and connection to resources and those types of things. I think that that would really excite me, and I think that you kind of are the future of Burien, if you stay here, and so how do we grow our own leaders? How do we grow the youth voice here? I mean, and I'm not just saying that because you're sitting here. That's something I have a passion around youth, and it's exciting to see what your ideas are, and I don't think you necessarily have space here or activities that bring culture together. And oftentimes, I know in raising my daughter here, oftentimes what brought the rest of the community together was celebrating something young people were doing. So whether it was sports or whether it was graduation or whether it was cultural events, things like that young people were doing, it brought the community together. So I wish we had more space, or dedicated space for that to occur, and a space where young people could feel like they could get access to help and support and youth engagement and leadership building and those types of things.
Burien has many events throughout the year, including the farmers market, the Arts Aglow Festival, the 4th of July Parade, the Strawberry Festival and Father's Day Car Show, and the new B-Town Fiesta and the Day of the Dead Festival. A way to bring more different cultures and communities together is to hold more ethnic events in the town square and do it more often to show off Burien's diversity. Another place that could also bring together different people or cultures is a teen center that could provide mentoring, job opportunities, academic help, and mental and physical teen health. This could help teenagers from different backgrounds become friends and get along and learn about each other's culture, while also being supported and provided help and things like that by people who run the center. Having a teen center can also decrease violence in teens. Since teen centers provide job opportunities, they also provide summer jobs. Research from the journal Science found that when teens in Chicago had a summer job that was at least 25 hours long, the violence within them decreased by 43% over the course of 16 months. Having a teen center would be a good way for teens to learn about other cultures, find friends, have mentors, jobs, stay out of trouble, and just have something to do. Another way to bring communities together is by adding a pool to the community center. Adding a pool would provide something for kids to do and bring diverse groups of people together to play together and also exercise. The idea of adding a pool has been around since 2000. In a survey from that year, 8% of respondents said that a facility that is really needed is a pool. Also, the fourth spot is team facilities at 3%. Not to mention that it would teach a very important skill, swimming.